that defies nature itself. In the desolate plains of Montana, where civilization ends and legends begin, a solitary cowboy faces a night that will change everything he believes about the world. When his rifle finds its mark on what he thinks is a deadly beast, the morning sun reveals a truth more stunning and dangerous than any folklore. What happens when the monster you've hunted becomes the woman you must save? This is a story of survival, transformation, and a bond that defies nature itself. The wind howled across the endless Montana grasslands like the breath of some ancient god, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Jake Thornton had been riding for 3 days straight, his weathered face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat crusted with trail dust. At 42, he was a man carved from the same unforgiving landscape he called home. Every line on his face, a testament to years spent under the merciless sun and frigid winters of the frontier. His ranch, the Broken Arrow, lay 20 miles to the east, but Jake wasn't heading home. For 2 weeks, something had been killing livestock across 3 counties. Sheep torn apart in their pens, cattle found mutilated in the fields, their bodies marked with claw marks too long to any mountain lion or bear. The ranchers were terrified, whispering about curses and demons in the saloons of the nearby town of Redemption Creek. But Jake didn't believe in superstitions. He believed in what he could see, touch, and if necessary, shoot. The sun was setting behind the jagged peaks of the Rockies when Jake made camp in a shallow canyon, sheltered from the wind by walls of red rock that glowed like embers in the fading light. He'd chosen this spot deliberately. The tracks he'd been following for the past day led directly through this canyon, and the narrow passage would force whatever he was hunting into close quarters. His Winchester rifle lay across his lap as he sat by a small fire, coffee brewing in a dented tin pot. The flames cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls, and somewhere in the darkness beyond, a coyote called out to the rising moon. Jake had learned to hunt from his father, who'd learned from his father before him. 3 generations of Thorntons had worked this land, fought for it, bled for it. His wife Sarah had died giving birth to their stillborn son 5 years ago, and since then, the ranch had been both his prison and his salvation. He worked from dawn until his body demanded rest, anything to keep the memories at bay. The other ranchers called him the Lonely Cowboy, though never to his face. They respected his skill with a rifle and his knowledge of the land, but they also pitied him, and Jake hated pity more than he hated the creature he was tracking. As full darkness descended, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. Jake pulled his heavy coat tighter and added more wood to the fire. The flames leaped higher, pushing back the shadows, but they couldn't push back the feeling that had been growing in his chest all day, the certainty that he was being watched. He'd felt it before, that prickling sensation on the back of his neck that came from being prey rather than predator. His hand moved to the rifle, fingers caressing the worn wood of the stock. The attack came without warning. One moment, Jake was staring into the fire, and the next, something enormous crashed through his camp with the force of an avalanche. He caught a glimpse of fur, of eyes that reflected the firelight like burning coals, of teeth longer than his fingers. The creature moved with impossible speed, a blur of muscle and rage that sent his coffee pot flying and scattered burning logs across the canyon floor. Jake rolled to his left, bringing the Winchester up even as claws raked across his shoulder, tearing through his coat and the flesh beneath. Pain exploded through his body, hot and immediate, but years of survival instinct took over. He fired once, twice, 3 times, the rifle bucking against his shoulder with each shot. The canyon filled with the deafening roar of gunfire, and something else, a howl that was neither fully animal nor fully human, a sound that spoke of ancient pain and fury. The creature staggered, dark blood staining its silver-gray fur, and for a moment, Jake saw it clearly in the firelight. It stood nearly 7 feet tall on legs that bent wrong, its body a nightmare fusion of wolf and something almost human. Yellow eyes met his, filled with an intelligence that froze the blood in his veins. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness beyond the fire with a speed that seemed to defy physics. Jake heard the sound of its passage, rocks scattering and brush breaking, growing fainter as it fled deeper into the canyon. He stood there, chest heaving, his shoulder burning with pain, staring into the darkness where the creature had vanished. Blood dripped from his fingertips, some of it belonging to whatever he'd just shot. The ranchers had been right to be afraid. The legends were true. Werewolves were real. Jake tore a strip from his shirt and bound his wounded shoulder as best he could with one hand and his teeth. The cuts were deep, but not life-threatening, assuming they didn't get infected. He'd survived worse. But as he reloaded his rifle with trembling fingers, he knew this hunt had become something different. This wasn't about protecting livestock anymore. That thing, whatever it was, had looked at him with human eyes. It had understood him, and in that moment of recognition, everything had changed. He couldn't go back now. Not without finishing this. As the fire died down to embers and the night grew colder, Jake Thornton made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. He would track the wounded creature, and when he found it, he would end this nightmare once and for all. Dawn came slowly to the canyon, light creeping down the rock walls like honey poured from a jar. Jake had barely slept, his body tense and alert for any sound that might signal another attack. But the night had passed in silence, broken only by the wind and the distant howling of normal wolves calling to each other across the wilderness. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache that promised days of misery ahead, but he'd had worse. The blood trail was easy to follow in the growing light. Dark splatters marked the rocks and sparse vegetation, leading deeper into the canyon system that webbed through these mountains like cracks in old china. Jake moved cautiously, rifle at the ready, eyes scanning constantly for any sign of movement. The creature had been badly wounded. At least one of his shots had struck true. But wounded animals were the most dangerous, driven by pain and fear into desperate acts. The trail led him through narrow passages where the canyon walls pressed so close he could touch both sides at once, then opened into wider valleys carpeted with scrub brush and stunted pines. The sun climbed higher, bringing with it a warmth that made Jake's sweat-soaked shirt steam in the cool mountain air. He paused occasionally to drink from his canteen and check his back trail, a habit born from years of careful survival. Nothing followed him. Nothing moved except the wind through the grass and the occasional hawk circling overhead. It was mid-morning when Jake found the cave. The blood trail led directly to a dark opening in the canyon wall, half hidden behind a rockfall that looked recent. The entrance was just tall enough for a man to enter if he stooped, and from within came a sound that made him pause, a soft, whimpering cry that was unmistakably human. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle, a trap perhaps, the creature luring him in with mimicked sounds. But something in that cry spoke of genuine suffering, of pain that transcended the bestial. He lit a torch from his supplies, a length of branch wrapped with oil-soaked cloth, and entered the cave with his rifle in one hand and the torch in the other. The passage descended at a steep angle, the walls pressing close and damp with moisture. The whimpering grew louder, echoing off the stone in a way that made it impossible to judge distance. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to flee this place of darkness and blood. But he pressed forward, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and there, in the flickering light of his torch, Jake saw something that shattered every assumption he'd made about the world. The werewolf lay curled on the cave floor, but even as he watched, its body was changing. The fur was receding, melting away like snow in spring. The bones were shifting, the horrible bent legs straightening, the massive clawed hands becoming delicate and human. Within moments, where the monster had been, there now lay a woman. She was perhaps 25, with long dark hair matted with blood and dirt, her naked body marked with the bullet wounds Jake had inflicted. One shot had caught her in the side, just below the ribs. Another had grazed her thigh. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid, her skin pale as milk in the torchlight. And she was beautiful in a way that made Jake's chest ache with a feeling he thought had died with Sarah. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The creature that had attacked him, that had terrorized the countryside and killed dozens of animals, was this fragile-looking woman lying helpless on the cave floor. Every rational part of his brain told him to raise the rifle and finish what he'd started. She was dangerous, a monster in human skin. But as he watched her breathe, saw the pain etched on her unconscious face, he found he couldn't do it. Jake lowered the rifle and approached cautiously. Up close, he could see that she was shivering despite the relative warmth of the cave, her body going into shock from blood loss and the trauma of transformation. He'd seen men die from lesser wounds on the battlefield during his time in the cavalry. If he left her here, she would be dead by nightfall. The thought brought an unexpected twist of something in his chest, not quite guilt, but close to it. He made a decision that would have seemed insane just hours before. Setting his rifle aside, but keeping it within reach, Jake removed his coat and covered the woman's naked form. Then he tore more strips from his already ruined shirt and began to clean and bandage her wounds using water from his canteen and the basic medical supplies he carried. The bullet in her side had passed through cleanly, missing anything vital by what looked like sheer luck. The other wound was superficial. She would live, assuming infection didn't set in. As he worked, Jake studied her face. She had high cheekbones and a strong jaw, features that spoke of mixed heritage, perhaps Native American blood mixed with European. There was a scar above her left eyebrow, old and faded, and her hands, though delicate, bore the calluses of hard work. She was no pampered town girl. Whoever she was, whatever she was, she'd known hardship. The woman stirred as he finished bandaging her wounds, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her eyes flickered open, and Jake found himself staring into irises of a startling amber color, like honey held up to sunlight. For a moment, confusion clouded those eyes, then recognition and fear flooded in. She tried to scramble backward, gasping in pain as the movement pulled at her wounds. "Easy," Jake heard himself say, his voice rough from disuse. "You're hurt bad. Don't move." She stared at him with those strange amber eyes, breathing hard, clearly trying to decide whether to fight or flee despite her injuries. Then her gaze fell on the rifle lying just beyond Jake's reach, and understanding dawned on her face. She knew who he was, the man who'd shot her, the hunter who'd tracked her to this cave, and yet he bandaged her wounds instead of finishing her off. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper, her voice carrying an accent Jake couldn't quite place. "Why didn't you kill me?" Jake met her gaze steadily, asking himself the same question. Why hadn't he? Every law of man and nature said he should have ended this threat. But looking at her now, seeing the intelligence and fear and something else, something almost like hope, in those amber eyes, he found himself without an answer. "I don't know," he said finally, the truth of it settling on him like a weight. "God help me, I don't know." The woman told him her name was Luna. She spoke slowly at first, as if the words were rusty from disuse, or perhaps because speaking at all was an act of trust she wasn't certain she should give. Jake helped her sit up, propping her against the cave wall, and offered her water from his canteen. She drank greedily, some of the color returning to her pale cheeks. "How long?" Jake asked, keeping his voice neutral. "How long have you been ... what you are?" Luna's laugh was bitter and short. "Since I was 16. 9 years now. 9 years of full moons and hunting, and trying not to become the monster everyone would say I am." She touched the bandage on her side, gingerly. I suppose I failed at that. The story came out in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror that Jake had to assemble into something coherent. Luna had been born in a small settlement on the Canadian border, the daughter of a French trapper and a Blackfoot woman. When she was 16, her village had been attacked by a rogue werewolf, a creature that had completely given in to its bestial nature. Her father had died defending her. Her mother had died from her wounds days later. And Luna herself had been bitten, infected with a curse that would define the rest of her life. I tried to stay with what remained of my people, she said, staring at the cave floor. But the elders could see what was happening to me. The first transformation nearly killed me. The second time, I killed a dog that had been like a brother to me since childhood. The third time, they drove me out, cast me into the wilderness to live or die as fate decided. For 9 years, Luna had wandered the mountains and plains, staying far from human settlements, hunting game to survive. She'd learned to control the transformations to some degree, though the full moon always brought the change whether she willed it or not. She'd tried to be careful, to hunt only animals, to never let the beast within taste human blood. But sometimes livestock were easier prey than wild game, and the hunger during the full moon was a living thing that demanded to be fed. I never killed anyone, she said, and Jake heard the desperate need for him to believe her. I swear it on my parents' graves. I've killed sheep and cattle, yes, and I know that's wrong. I know those animals belong to people who depend on them. But I never killed a person. I never even came close. Jake believed her, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the earnestness in those amber eyes. Maybe it was the fact that she'd had a chance to kill him in their fight and had instead chosen to flee. Or maybe he just wanted to believe that not everything in the world was as simple as monster and hunter, evil and good. The ranchers are terrified, he said quietly. They think you're going to start attacking people. There's talk of forming a hunting party, bringing in professional trackers, maybe even soldiers from Fort Benson. Luna closed her eyes, and Jake saw tears squeeze out from beneath her lashes. I should have kept moving. Should have left Montana entirely. But this land, it feels like home in a way nowhere else has since my village. And I thought maybe, if I was careful enough, I could live here without anyone knowing. I was a fool. The torch was burning low, casting longer shadows that danced across the cave walls. Jake knew he should be getting back to his camp, should be deciding what to do about the situation he'd stumbled into. By all rights, he should notify the other ranchers that the threat was neutralized, that the werewolf was dead. It would be easy enough to say he'd killed it and buried the body. They would believe him. The lonely cowboy, solving everyone's problems as he always did, then returning to his isolated existence. But looking at Luna, seeing the mixture of fear and exhaustion and stubborn pride on her face, Jake found he couldn't do it. She wasn't a monster. She was a woman cursed with an affliction she'd never asked for, trying to survive in a world that would kill her without hesitation if it knew what she was. In that moment, Jake saw a reflection of himself alone, outcast, carrying wounds that the world couldn't see, but that shaped every moment of existence. The next full moon, he said. When is it? Luna looked up at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. 3 weeks. Why? Because in 3 weeks, you're going to transform again. And when you do, the ranchers will know you're still alive. They'll come hunting with everything they have. Jake ran a hand through his hair, a plan forming even as he spoke. You need somewhere safe to be during the full moon. Somewhere you can't hurt anyone or anything, and where no one can hurt you. Understanding dawned on Luna's face. You're offering to help me? After I attacked you? After everything? I'm offering you a chance, Jake corrected. I've got a root cellar at my ranch, built into solid rock with a door that can be barred from the outside. It was meant to store food through the winter, but it's strong enough to hold you when the moon is full. You stay there during your transformations, and the rest of the time, you stay out of sight on my land. In return, you work the ranch. God knows I could use the help, and it'll keep you fed without having to hunt." It was insane. Jake knew it was insane, even as he made the offer. He was proposing to harbor a werewolf on his property, to deliberately conceal her existence from his neighbors and fellow ranchers. If they found out, they'd likely hang him alongside Luna. But something in him, some part that had been frozen since Sarah's death, was thawing in the warmth of Luna's desperate hope. "Why would you do this?" Luna asked, her voice barely audible. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. If anything, I owe you my life twice over, once for not killing me when you had the chance, and again for stopping the bleeding from wounds I deserved." Jake thought about that question, really thought about it. Why was he doing this? Was it loneliness, the desire for company, even if that company came in such a strange package? Was it guilt over having shot an innocent person, regardless of what form she'd been wearing at the time? Or was it something deeper, some recognition of kindred spirits lost in the wilderness of their own making? "Because everyone deserves a chance to be more than their worst moment," he said finally. "And because I know what it's like to be alone with ghosts." Luna studied him for a long moment, and Jake had the eerie sense that she was seeing through his skin to the scars beneath. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right. I'll accept your offer with one condition. If I ever hurt someone, if the beast in me ever breaks free and does real harm, you end it. No hesitation, no second chances. You put me down like the rabid animal they think I am." Jake extended his hand. "Deal." Her hand was smaller than his, but her grip was strong as they shook on an agreement that would bind their fates together in ways neither could yet imagine. As they sealed their bargain in the flickering light of the dying torch, neither noticed the shadow that moved past the cave entrance, or the eyes that had watched their entire conversation from the darkness outside. The journey back to the Broken Arrow took 2 days, and they were the longest 2 days of Jake's life. Luna was still weak from her wounds and the transformation, leaning heavily on him as they navigated the rough terrain. They moved slowly, Jake constantly watching for any sign that they'd been followed or observed. He told Luna about the shadow he'd spotted near the cave, though by the time he'd investigated, there had been nothing there but wind-stirred grass and his own paranoia. The ranch sat in a valley between 2 ridges. The house itself, a sturdy log structure his grandfather had built with his own hands. The barn was newer, put up by Jake and his father working side by side through one long summer. Behind the house, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was the entrance to the root cellar, a heavy wooden door set into the hillside, leading to a chamber carved from solid stone. It had seemed excessive when his grandfather built it, designed to survive tornadoes and Indian raids and any other calamity the frontier could throw at them. Now, Jake blessed the old man's paranoia. He settled Luna in the small guest room, the one that had been meant for the children he and Sarah never got to have. Luna protested at first, saying she could sleep in the barn, that she didn't deserve such kindness. But Jake insisted, and eventually exhaustion overrode her objections. She was asleep within minutes of her head hitting the pillow, her breathing deep and regular. That night, Jake sat on his porch, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds spilled on black velvet. He'd made a decision today that could get him killed. That went against every practical instinct he'd developed over 42 years of hard living. And yet, he felt more alive than he had in the 5 years since Sarah's death. Having someone else in the house, even someone as unusual as Luna, filled a void he hadn't fully acknowledged existed. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Luna healed with a speed that startled Jake, though she explained that werewolves had enhanced healing abilities even in their human form. Within a week, she was moving without pain, the bullet wounds little more than pink scars. She insisted on helping with the ranch work, and Jake discovered she was as capable as any hired hand he'd ever employed. She could break horses, mend fences, and work cattle with a natural ease that spoke of years spent in hard country. They talked as they worked, and Jake learned more about Luna's life. She'd taught herself to read from books salvaged from abandoned homesteads. She knew the mountains and forests better than any human alive, every game trail and water source for 100 miles. She could predict weather changes by the taste of the wind and identify edible plants that would keep a person alive when game was scarce. She was funny too, with a dry wit that caught Jake off guard and made him laugh in a way he'd forgotten he could. But beneath the growing friendship, there was always the awareness of what Luna was. Sometimes, Jake would catch her staring at the moon with an expression of such longing and fear that it made his chest ache. Other times, she would stiffen suddenly, her nostrils flaring as she caught some scent invisible to him, and he would see the predator lurking beneath the human facade. Those moments reminded him that he was playing a dangerous game, that one mistake could end with blood and tragedy. 2 weeks after Luna's arrival, Jake rode into Redemption Creek for supplies. The town was buzzing with talk of the werewolf. There had been no new attacks since Jake's confrontation in the canyon, and some folks were saying maybe the beast had moved on or died of its wounds. But others, led by a rancher named Elias Blackwood, were pushing for a large-scale hunt to make sure the threat was truly gone. Blackwood was a big man, 6.5 feet of muscle and meanness, with a reputation for settling disputes with his fists. His ranch, the Double B, was the largest in 3 counties, and he'd built his empire through a combination of shrewd business sense and ruthless elimination of competitors. He'd made offers on the Broken Arrow before, offers that Jake had refused, and there was bad blood between them that went back years. "Thornton!" Blackwood's voice boomed across the general store as Jake was buying flour and coffee. "Heard you were out tracking that werewolf. Any luck?" Jake turned slowly, keeping his expression neutral. "Found tracks leading into the high country. Whatever it was, it's probably dead or far away by now. Probably isn't good enough," Blackwood said, stepping closer. "That thing killed 30 head of my cattle. Cost me thousands of dollars. I want its head on a pike to send a message to any other creatures thinking about preying on what is mine." There were murmurs of agreement from the other men in the store. Jake recognized most of them ranchers and farmers he'd known for years, decent men driven by fear and economic loss. He couldn't blame them for wanting the threat eliminated, but he also couldn't let them find Luna. "It's been 2 weeks with no new attacks," Jake said reasonably. "Could be the thing is dead. Could be it moved to easier hunting grounds. Either way, organizing a big hunting party now would be a waste of time and resources. Most of you have spring calving to deal with." Or, Blackwood said, his eyes narrowing, it could be that someone's hiding it. Could be someone's decided to play hero and try to tame a wild animal. He stepped even closer, and Jake could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You wouldn't be doing something stupid like that, would you, Thornton?" The store had gone quiet, everyone watching to see how Jake would respond. He met Blackwood's gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch just long enough to establish he wasn't intimidated. "I've got no love for creatures that kill livestock, Elias. You know that as well as anyone. I'm just saying there's no point getting worked up when the problem might have solved itself." Blackwood held his gaze for another moment, then laughed a sound without humor. "Maybe you're right. Or maybe you've gone soft living alone in that valley. Either way, I've got a dozen men ready to ride come next full moon. We'll flush out whatever's hiding in those mountains, and if we happen to cross your land in the process, well, I'm sure you won't mind us protecting our interests." It was a threat, barely veiled. Blackwood was going to search the Broken Arrow, and he was going to do it during the full moon when Luna would be at her most vulnerable. Jake felt his hand tighten on the bag of supplies he was carrying, fighting the urge to smash it into Blackwood's smug face, but that would only confirm the man's suspicions. "My land is private property," Jake said quietly. "Anyone crosses onto it without permission, they'll answer to me. Is that a threat, Thornton? It's a statement of fact. Just like it as a fact that the last man who tried to push me around ended up regretting it. The tension in the store was thick enough to cut. Then the shopkeeper, old Tom Whitmore, cleared his throat loudly. Gentlemen, I've got customers waiting. Take your disputes outside, if you're going to have them. Blackwood backed off, but his eyes promised that this conversation wasn't over. See you around, Thornton. Real soon. Jake finished his purchases and rode back to the ranch with a growing sense of urgency. Blackwood suspected something, which meant they were running out of time. The full moon was 5 days away, and when it came, they needed to be ready not just to contain Luna, but to defend against Blackwood's hunting party. It was going to be the longest night of Jake's life, and possibly the last if things went wrong. Jake spent the next 4 days preparing for what he knew would be a siege. He reinforced the root cellar door with additional bars and checked every inch of the stone chamber to make sure there were no weaknesses Luna could exploit once the transformation took her. He stocked the main house with ammunition and positioned his rifles at strategic points. And he had several long conversations with Luna about what was coming. You need to leave, Luna said on the evening before the full moon. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Blackwood is coming, and he's going to have men with him. If they find me, they'll kill you too just for harboring me. I'm not leaving, Jake said flatly. And neither are you. We made a deal. Jake, be reasonable. One man can't hold off a dozen. I held off worse odds during the war. Besides, who says I'm planning to fight them? If they want to search the property, I'll let them search. They won't find anything. Luna looked at him like he'd lost his mind. I'll be in the root cellar, transformed. If they open that door, they won't know about the root cellar. It's hidden behind the woodpile, and the entrance is overgrown with vines. Even if they stumble across it, the door is solid oak reinforced with iron. You could claw at it all night and not get through. Jake turned to face her fully. Trust me, Luna. I've thought this through. What he didn't tell her was the fear that kept him awake at night. The fear that she was right, that he was gambling both their lives on a plan that had a dozen ways to go wrong. But he'd made his choice, and Jake Thornton had never been one to back down once committed to a course of action. The full moon rose like a silver eye opening over the world. Jake had secured Luna in the root cellar an hour before sunset, making sure she had blankets and water for after the transformation. She'd been shaking as he closed the door. Whether from fear or the first stirrings of the change, he couldn't tell. He'd heard her screaming as the transformation took her, a sound that started human and ended in a howl that made his blood run cold. Now he waited on the porch, a rifle across his knees, watching the moonlit valley for signs of movement. They came an hour after midnight, a line of torches winding down from the ridge like a snake of fire. 12 men, just as Blackwood had promised, all of them armed and looking for blood. Jake stood as they approached, keeping his hands visible but near his weapons. Blackwood was at the head of the group, looking even larger in the flickering torchlight. Evening, Elias. That's far enough. State your business. You know our business, Thornton. We're hunting a werewolf, and we have reason to believe it might be on your property. What reason would that be? The fact that you've been acting squirrely for 2 weeks. The fact that you've got supplies for 2 people when everyone knows you live alone. The fact that you seem mighty eager to convince everyone the werewolf is dead. Blackwood dismounted, his men following suit. We're going to search your property, Jake. You can cooperate, or you can get out of the way. From inside the root cellar, muffled by earth and stone, came a howl that made every man there freeze. It was a sound of rage and hunger, of something that belonged to nightmares rather than the natural world. Several of Blackwood's men reached for their rifles, eyes wide with fear. What the hell was that? One of them asked, his voice shaking. Wolves, Jake said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. Regular wolves. A den in the hills this time of year. But Blackwood wasn't buying it. His eyes were scanning the property, taking in every detail. That was no regular wolf. Where is it, Thornton? Where are you hiding it? Before Jake could answer, one of Blackwood's men shouted from near the barn. Boss, I found something. He was pointing at the ground, and in the moonlight, Jake could see what he'd spotted tracks in the soft earth. Footprints that started human but gradually shifted, the toes lengthening into claws, the stride widening. Luna must have walked this way before the full moon, and the transformation had begun before she reached the cellar. Blackwood's face split into a grin of triumph. Well, looks like the lonely cowboy has been keeping secrets. He raised his voice so all his men could hear. Spread out. Search every building, every structure on this property. And be careful. We're dealing with a werewolf, which means it could be anywhere, in any form. Jake stepped forward, putting himself between Blackwood and the house. You've got no legal right to be here, Elias. This is private property, and I'm ordering you to leave. Legal right? Blackwood laughed. We're past legal rights, Thornton. You've been harboring a monster, putting every rancher in 3 counties at risk. That makes you complicit in every animal that thing has killed. Hell, it makes you almost as guilty as the creature itself. From the root cellar came another howl, closer and louder. Luna was aware of the men outside, and the predator in her was responding to the threat. Jake could hear her clawing at the door, the sound of wood splintering. The oak was thick and the reinforcements were strong, but he didn't know how long they would hold against a werewolf's strength. Several of Blackwood's men had located the root cellar. Pulling aside the woodpile, Jake had carefully arranged to hide it. They stood around the entrance, torches raised, rifles pointed at the door. It's in here, boss, one of them called. I can hear it. Blackwood walked over to the cellar entrance, Jake following close behind. The big ranchers studied the reinforced door, then looked at Jake with an expression that mixed contempt and something almost like respect. You actually tried to contain it. Thought you could control a werewolf like it was some kind of wild horse to be broken. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the biggest fool. Maybe both, Jake said quietly. But that thing in there, it's not what you think. It's not a mindless killer. It's a monster, Blackwood interrupted. And monsters need to be put down. Boys, get ready. On my signal, we open that door and fill it with lead. Aim for the head and the heart, and don't stop shooting until it stops moving. No. Jake stepped in front of the door, spreading his arms wide. I won't let you do this. Then you'll die with it, Blackwood said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. But this is how it has to be. The sound of rifle bolts being pulled back echoed through the valley. 12 guns pointed at Jake, and behind him, separated only by oak and iron, Luna raged against her prison. Jake thought about Sarah, about the son he'd never known, about all the choices that had led him to this moment. And he realized that for the first time in 5 years, he didn't want to die. He wanted to live, to see what happened next, to find out if a lonely cowboy and a cursed woman could build something resembling a life together. Wait, Jake said, and was surprised by the steadiness in his voice. There's something you need to know. The dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed too beautiful for the tense scene playing out in Jake Thornton's yard. Inside the root cellar, the sounds of struggle had ceased. The transformation was the dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed too beautiful for the tense scene playing out in Jake Thornton's yard. Inside the root cellar, the sounds of struggle had ceased. The transformation was reversing with the rising sun, and Jake could hear Luna's human voice now, weak and exhausted, calling his name. There's something you need to know, Jake repeated, looking directly at Blackwood. That creature in there, during the full moon, it's a werewolf, yes. But the rest of the time, it's a woman. A woman who was cursed through no fault of her own, who spent 9 years trying to survive without hurting anyone. She's never killed a human being. Never even tried. Blackwood's expression hardened. You expect me to believe that? To feel sympathy for something that's butchered livestock across 3 counties? I expect you to understand the difference between killing to survive and killing for sport, Jake said. She hunted cattle and sheep because she was starving, because the alternative was attacking people. Every time the full moon came, she could have gone into town, could have killed easily. But she didn't. She chose the hard path, the path that kept her humanity intact even when her body wasn't human. He's telling the truth. The voice came from behind. Blackwood's men and everyone turned to see Tom Whitmore, the shopkeeper from Redemption Creek, sitting on his horse at the edge of the property. The old man dismounted slowly, his weathered face grave. I followed you boys out here because I had a feeling this would go bad. And I need to tell you something I should have said weeks ago. Tom walked into the circle of armed men, ignoring their weapons. 20 years ago, my daughter was attacked by a werewolf near Fort Benson. She survived, but she was infected. I spent 5 years hiding her, trying to help her control the curse. She was gentle and kind, and she fought every day to hold on to her humanity. But eventually, the townsfolk found out. They didn't care that she'd never hurt anyone. They dragged her from our home and burned her alive while I watched. The old man's voice broke, and Jake saw tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. I've lived with that guilt for 15 years. The guilt of not fighting harder for her, of letting fear and ignorance win. When I heard about this werewolf, about the attacks on livestock but never on people, I wondered. And when I saw Jake's face in my store, saw how protective he was acting, I knew. Tom turned to Blackwood. There's a woman in that cellar who deserves a chance at life, Elias. A chance my daughter never got. If you kill her tonight, you're no better than the mob that murdered my girl. You're just another man, too afraid to see past the monster to the person underneath. Silence fell over the group. Several of Blackwood's men shifted uncomfortably, their rifles lowering slightly. These were decent men, Jake realized, ranchers and farmers who'd been driven by fear and economic loss, not bloodlust. Tom's words had struck a chord, reminding them that justice and vengeance weren't always the same thing. But Blackwood's face remained hard. That's a touching story, Tom, but it doesn't change the facts. That thing has cost us thousands of dollars in livestock. It's a threat to our livelihoods. Then I'll pay, Jake said. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, he committed to them. Every head of cattle or sheep that's been killed, I'll compensate the owners. I've got savings, and I can sell off some of my land if necessary. It'll take time, but I'll make it right. Blackwood laughed, but there was no humor in it. You'd bankrupt yourself for a monster? You've really lost your mind, Thornton. Maybe, Jake admitted. Or maybe I've finally found it again. He thought of Sarah, of the compassion she'd always shown to wounded creatures, to anyone suffering. She would have helped Luna without hesitation. My wife used to say that mercy is what separates us from the beasts. That the measure of a man is not in his strength, but in his willingness to show kindness when it would be easier to show cruelty. I forgot that for a long time. I'm not forgetting it again. From inside the cellar, Luna's voice called out again, stronger now. Jake, don't. Don't sacrifice everything for me. I'm not worth it. That's not your decision to make, Jake called back. Then, to Blackwood, you want to shoot someone, shoot me. But you'll have to do it in cold blood, looking me in the eye, because I'm not moving from this door. The standoff stretched on, tension thick enough to choke on. The sun continued to rise, burning away the last of the night shadows. Jake could see Blackwood calculating, weighing options, trying to find a path that didn't make him look weak, but also didn't require him to murder a neighbor in front of witnesses. It was one of Blackwood's own men who broke the impasse. A young rancher named Miller, whose spread bordered Jake's, lowered his rifle and stepped back. I'm out. I came here to hunt a werewolf, not to shoot Jake Thornton. The man's offering to pay for damages, offering to take responsibility. That's more than fair. Miller Blackwood started, but the young man cut him off. No, Elias, you've always been able to push people around because you're bigger and meaner than most. But this isn't right, and you know it. If that woman in there has managed to hold on to her humanity despite everything, if she's fought the curse for 9 years without killing anyone, then she deserves a chance. Hell, she deserves our respect. One by one, the other men began to lower their weapons. Some looked relieved, others conflicted, but all of them seemed to recognize that killing Luna, and probably Jake, would be a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Even the hardest among them could see the difference between hunting a beast and murdering a woman, regardless of what she became under the full moon. Blackwood stood alone, his rifle still raised, fury and frustration warring on his face. For a moment, Jake thought the man might shoot anyway, might decide that proving his dominance was worth becoming a killer. But then Blackwood lowered his weapon with a curse. Fine, he spat. You want to play house with a monster. That's your funeral. But hear me. Thornton, one person gets hurt. One single human being gets so much as a scratch from that thing. And I'm coming back with the army if I have to. And next time, no amount of noble sacrifice is going to stop me from putting it down. Understood? Understood, Jake said, not allowing himself to show the relief flooding through him. And Elias, thank you for making the right choice, Blackwood snorted. Don't thank me. Just stay out of my way. He mounted his horse and gestured to his men. Let's go. We've wasted enough time here. The group rode off as the sun cleared the horizon, their torches extinguished and their weapons holstered. Tom Whitmore lingered behind, approaching Jake with a sad smile. You're going to have a hard time with it, you know? Most folks won't be as understanding as Miller. They'll whisper about you, call you cursed or crazy. Let them, Jake said. I've been called worse. Tom nodded, then surprised Jake by embracing him. Take care of her, the old man whispered. Give her the life my daughter never got to have. That's all I ask. I will, Jake promised. I swear it. After Tom rode away, Jake finally unbarred the root cellar door. Luna was huddled in the corner, wrapped in the blankets he'd left for her face streaked with tears. She looked up at him with those amber eyes, and Jake saw in him a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and something deeper that he didn't yet have a name for. You're insane, she said, her voice hoarse. You could have died. So could you, Jake replied, offering his hand to help her up. Seemed only fair to share the risk. Luna took his hand, and as he pulled her to her feet, she stumbled against him. For a moment, they stood there, close enough that Jake could feel her heartbeat, could smell the earth and sweat, and something wild that clung to her skin. She looked up at him, and time seemed to stop. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this for me? Jake thought about that question, really thought about it. He thought about loneliness and second chances, about monsters and humanity, about the way Luna laughed when she was grooming the horses and the fierce intelligence in her eyes when she talked about the mountains she loved. He thought about how, for the first time in 5 years, his house felt like a home instead of a tomb. Because everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are, he said finally. Not for their worst moment or their biggest mistake, but for the choices they make every day to be better, to be human. You've been fighting to hold on to your humanity for 9 years against impossible odds. That makes you more human than most people I know. Luna's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different tears of relief, of being understood, of finally, after so long, not being alone. She leaned her forehead against Jake's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she cried out years of fear and isolation. The weeks that followed established a new normal at the Broken Arrow. Jake made good on his promise, selling off a portion of his land to compensate the ranchers for their lost livestock. It hurt to let go of land his grandfather had claimed, but he found he didn't regret it. Money and property could be rebuilt. Trust and honor, once lost, were harder to recover. Luna thrived in her new life. She worked the ranch alongside Jake, her supernatural strength and stamina making her the best hired hand he'd ever had. But more than that, she brought laughter and companionship back into his life. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. She taught him the old ways her mother had shown her, how to read weather in the flight of birds, how to find water in the driest season, how to move through the forest without leaving a trace. He taught her to read and write better, sharing his small library of books that had belonged to Sarah. The full moons came and went, each one spent with Luna secured in the root cellar. It never got easier, hearing her transformation, knowing the pain she endured each month. But Jake was always there, waiting by the door through the long nights, talking to her even when she couldn't respond in human words, letting her know she wasn't alone. And each dawn, when she emerged exhausted and human once more, he was there to catch her if she stumbled, to wrap her in warm blankets and lead her back to the house. The other ranchers kept their distance, as Tom had predicted. Some whispered about Jake harboring a demon. Others just thought he'd finally cracked from loneliness. But Miller kept his word, spreading the truth about what Luna was and what she'd sacrificed to maintain her humanity. Slowly, grudgingly, a few of the more open-minded folks came to accept the situation, if not fully understand it. 6 months after that night of the standoff, Jake and Luna were repairing a fence line when she paused, her hand on his arm. "Jake, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, noting the serious expression on her face. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about leaving. Not because I'm unhappy here. This has been the best 6 months of my life. But because I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. Blackwood still watches this place. Some of the other ranches still treat you like you're cursed. You could have a normal life again if I wasn't here." Jake set down the fence post he'd been holding and took both of Luna's hands in his. "You listen to me. I don't want a normal life. Normal was what I had after Sarah died alone, going through the motions, waiting to die. You brought me back to life, Luna. You reminded me what it means to hope, to care about someone, to have a reason to wake up in the morning beyond just surviving another day. But no buts. You're staying. That is, if you want to stay. Not as my hired hand or my responsibility, but as ... double quote." He paused, searching for the right words. "As my partner, in every sense of the word." Luna stared at him, her amber eyes wide. "Jake, I'm a werewolf. Every full moon, I become a monster." "How could you want?" "You're not a monster," Jake interrupted firmly. "You're a woman dealing with an extraordinary curse with more courage and dignity than anyone I've ever known. The werewolf is part of you, yes, but it doesn't define you. Your choices define you. The fact that you've never given up, never given in to the easy path of violence, that you fight every month to maintain your humanity. That's who you are." "I could hurt you," Luna whispered. "During a transformation, if something went wrong. Life is risk," Jake said simply. "Sarah could have been hurt by 100 different things on this ranch. She could have been thrown from a horse, trampled by cattle, bitten by a snake. I couldn't protect her from everything, and I can't protect you from your curse. But I can stand beside you while you face it. If you'll have me." Luna laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. "Have you? Jake Thornton, you're offering to tie yourself to a cursed woman who'll never be fully human, who'll bring you nothing but complications and danger. And you're asking if I'll have you?" "When you put it that way, it does sound pretty one-sided," Jake admitted with a smile. Then his expression turned serious. "I love you, Luna. I didn't think I'd ever say those words again after Sarah, but you've shown me that the heart is bigger than we think, that it can hold multiple loves without diminishing either of them. Sarah will always be part of me, but you're my future if you want to be." Luna pulled him close, kissing him with a passion that took his breath away. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you too. I have for months, but I was afraid to say it, afraid to hope for something so impossible." "Yes, Jake. Yes to everything." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony in Jake's parlor, with Tom Whitmore and young Miller as witnesses. It wasn't the wedding either of them might have dreamed of in another life, but it was real and true, and that was all that mattered. Luna wore a simple dress that had belonged to Sarah. Jake had offered it, and Luna had accepted with tears in her eyes, understanding the honor and trust that gesture represented. The years that followed were not easy. There were still full moons to endure, still neighbors who whispered and avoided them, still moments when the curse seemed too heavy to bear. But there were also sunrises shared on the porch, laughter over breakfast, the quiet contentment of working side by side. Jake taught Luna to play chess on long winter evenings. Luna taught Jake the songs her mother had sung, in a language few still remembered. 3 years after their wedding, Luna told Jake she was pregnant. It should have been impossible. Werewolves were thought to be sterile, but life, as Jake had learned, had a way of surprising you. The pregnancy was difficult, with Luna's transformations becoming more painful as her body changed. But she endured, and on a spring morning, when the mountains were covered in wildflowers, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Luna Thornton. The baby was perfect, with Jake's blue eyes and Luna's dark hair, and lungs that could wake the dead when she cried. And when the next full moon came, Luna transformed as always, but the baby slept peacefully through the night, showing no signs of the curse. Whatever gift or miracle had allowed the pregnancy had also protected their daughter from her mother's affliction. Jake stood on his porch years later, now in his 50s, watching Luna teach their daughter how to track deer through the forest. Sarah was 10 now, fearless and wild as her mother, but with a gentleness that reminded Jake of the woman she was named after. Luna's hair had threads of silver in it, though she moved with the same grace she always had, and when she laughed at something their daughter said, the sound still made Jake's heart swell. He thought about that night years ago when he de-shot a werewolf in a canyon and followed the blood trail to a cave. He thought about the choice he'd made to bandage wounds instead of finishing the kill, to offer shelter instead of executing judgment. It had seemed insane at the time, a decision that defied all logic and self-preservation. But looking at his family now, at the life they built together from impossibility and hope, Jake understood something fundamental about the nature of monsters and humanity. The real curse wasn't the transformation Luna endured every month. It was loneliness, isolation, the belief that we are defined by our worst moments rather than our best choices. Luna had taught him that humanity wasn't something you were born with or could lose in an instant. It was something you fought for every day, something you chose again and again when it would be easier to give up. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber that matched his wife's eyes, Jake Thornton smiled. He'd been called the lonely cowboy once, a man apart from the world, wounded by loss and hardened by survival. But he wasn't lonely anymore. He was home, with a family that shouldn't exist, living a life that defied every rule and expectation. And he wouldn't change a single moment of it. In the end, the greatest transformations weren't the ones that happened under the full moon. They were the ones that happened in the human heart, when fear became courage, when judgment became mercy, and when a lonely cowboy discovered that love was the most powerful magic of all, capable of transforming monsters into women, strangers into family, and a house into a home. The curse remained, as curses do. Every full moon brought its trials, its pain, its reminder that some things could not be changed or escaped. But between those moons were weeks and months and years of life lived fully, of love given freely, of a family that had learned to embrace both the darkness and the light within them all. And in the end, that was more than enough.